Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes before we get going. So we're just setting up on Facebook, and we have a lot of people registered to join us. We've got nearly 1,000 people registered for this meeting. So we'll give it a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to get in, and then we'll get going. Okay, well, thank you. There are still people joining us, but I think we'll make a start. You are all very welcome. My name is Ben Jamal. I'm the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Let me just say something, first of all, about the structure of tonight's meeting. We have 3 speakers who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and they're each going to speak for about 10 minutes each. And then we're going to open up the floor for questions. The chat is open, so please could you post any questions that you have into the chat, and the PSC staff team who are beavering away behind the scenes will collate those questions, and we will ask them of the panelists when we come to that point. Can I ask, I know people like to use the chat for other general comments or to introduce themselves, but if we could prioritize people using the chat predominantly for posting questions, but we will also be posting links to upcoming actions and campaigns that we want to encourage everybody to become involved in. Let me also say all contributions that people make in the chat must adhere to the core aims and values of PSC, which includes centrally an opposition to all forms of racism and discrimination. And I need to say that anybody who violates those principles is subject to being removed from this event. So let me move straight on to introduce our speakers and set the frame for this meeting. We meet at an extraordinary moment in the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. As you all know, in the past years, Palestinians have been subject, particularly under Donald Trump's presidency, with what Palestinian civil society called, in a declaration calling for solidarity in 2019, they described it as an attempt to eliminate the Palestinian cause entirely. The Abraham Accords, of course, have seen a formalization of already existing alliances between Israel, the United States, and corrupt authoritarian Arab regimes, via which Israel sought to further isolate and marginalize the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. And Israel's calculation, surely, as it embraced Trump's plans, announced its intention to annex further swathes of Palestinian land, was that Palestinian resistance was crushed via years of oppression and a ramping up over the last decade of attacks on human rights defenders on the ground. And additionally, that the campaign to delegitimize the solidarity movement globally through narratives, in particular of anti-Semitism, had succeeded in creating such a chilling effect that would render impossible the sort of displays of global solidarity last witnessed in huge mobilizations in 2014. But what we have seen in 2021, and in particular in the last few weeks and months, is significant pushback against those developments. The reports by B'Tselem and then Human Rights Watch, which confirm the analysis that's been presented by Palestinian civil society for decades, that describes the structures of oppression that Israel has established over Palestinians as meeting the legal definition of apartheid, have been hugely important developments in mainstreaming of this narrative. And then in the past few weeks, we have seen extraordinary developments in terms of the growing unity of Palestinian resistance. In the face of ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah, of the violent repression of protests in East Jerusalem in response to that ethnic cleansing, the bombardment of Gaza, and then violent attacks upon Palestinian citizens inside Israel, we have seen an uprising of grassroots resistance, culminating in an historic general strike that saw millions of Palestinians across all of the territory united in a display of united popular resistance, overcoming Israel's imposed geographic and political fragmentation. And in turn, the solidarity movement responded with the UK leading the way with historic mobilizations in support of Palestinian resistance. So tonight we are going to hear from some of those resisting on the ground, and we are going to hear from speakers in Gaza. We are going to hear from a speaker from Haifa, and we are going to hear from a speaker from East Jerusalem. So let me hand over the floor to them, and let me introduce our first speaker, Rana Schubert, who's a published author and writer, an English language trainer, and an activist on the ground in Gaza. And Rana is going to speak to us about what she and her family have been experiencing over the past few weeks, and how they see the future in the light of the events of the past few weeks. Rana.
Thank you, Ben. I'm very honored to be speaking to your audience this evening. I'm going to try to summarize the experience, the horrific experience of the past, which took place 2 weeks ago, the Israeli aggression on Gaza Strip. I'm sure everyone knows that the Gaza Strip has been under a full land, air, and sea blockade since 2006. This is almost 15 years now. And it has been called by many people and institutions, Gaza has been called the biggest open air prison. And I can testify that this is not just a romantic term, if I may say that, but it is really, you really feel that you are in a prison or even in a cage, which is, and you get this suffocating feeling that, you know, you can't leave, you don't have the freedom of movement. So imagine being locked up in this place and then being attacked from above. This is what happened. This is the fourth major Israeli aggression over the Gaza Strip. Of course, there have been other 2-3 day escalations during between those major aggressions. But what happened during the last one was, I mean, by everybody is unanimous on this. Wherever I go, people say this is probably the worst of the aggressions so far. Or it seems that the Israelis, they're so creative. Every time they make sure to make it worse. I mean, this one was characterized by massive bombings of civilian buildings. And anybody that knows the Gaza Strip knows that it has 2 million people. They're living in these compact apartment buildings. My neighborhood, it's called a Rimal neighborhood. It was one of the worst. It received, you know, the worst bombing among the Gaza, the neighborhoods of the Gaza city. I mean, just down my street, 3 families were massacred. 42 people were killed in those 3 families because the Israelis, the Israeli warplanes bombed the streets. By bombing the streets, the buildings collapsed because, you know, the missiles they hit underneath the ground so deep that that they attacked, you know, the structure, the foundations of the homes. So this caused the massacre of 42 people on the spot that night. And today, just a few hours ago, a mother who was in critical condition, who had survived this specific attack, just died a few hours ago. I visited her daughter, and she gave us she gave us a testimony of what she went through that night, and it's really unimaginable, no matter how much I try to describe it. But imagine, I mean, the worst attacks happened in the middle of the night. Many people died in their sleep. This happened also not in my neighborhood, at beach camp. Also, 2 families were killed when they were as they slept. 2 mothers and their children. And we would hear people screaming. I would be in the house, in my house, and then hear people screaming for help. And you didn't know where the attacks were because the sound was so loud, and you imagined that the warplanes were striking your own home when they would in fact be far away, but they were so massive. And we would hear people screaming for help, and it was just it was really a nightmare. Until this day, we're still having nightmares, and people are still trying to go back to their lives, their normal lives, if I may say. But our lives were never normal even before this, because under this military blockade, you can never have a normal life. You're deprived of your basic human rights. You're constantly being dehumanized, being treated as, as something other than a human being. You have to keep shouting and making noise just to get your basic rights. I mean, like when we want to get medicine in, we want to get goods in, we have to keep negotiating and putting mediaries in between just to allow things in. When these things in other countries are just ordinary, basic life necessities, which, you know, you can, they have no problem accessing, but this is not the same for us. So when this attack came, I mean, it was really, like I said, it was the worst attack that we have ever witnessed so far, although it was only 11 days. And near the end of the attack, the Israeli intelligence would call people on their phones and tell them that we're going to hit your buildings, you have to evacuate. And this caused so much chaos in the middle of the night. People would just run in the streets because there is no safe place in Gaza. Like if my building was being threatened, where do I go to? If I go to another somebody else's house, does it mean that it's safer than my own? And some of these were for real, and some of them were jokes just to cause chaos. And I mean, a building just across from my own, which houses about like it's a 12-story building with like 4 apartments on each floor. And just imagine this massive, these large, I mean, people, all families running in the street in such large numbers, not knowing where to go because the Israelis decided that they want to attack their building or destroy the building. This was, I mean, if you compare the number of martyrs, the civilians and the resistance fighters, there are over 200, almost 60 civilians. Among of them are 67 children and 40 women. So most of the people who were killed were civilians. I can just, I have so many stories about what happened, and I don't think I can, I have a lot more to talk about and a lot more to write about and tell the world what it was like. But because I have a short amount of time today, I'm gonna talk about how people like you can stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I can say for sure that this round of fighting was different than previous rounds because we really saw with our own eyes, you know, the great protests among people in our own country, in our fragmented Palestine, 1948, in the West Bank, in the diaspora, in Lebanon, Jordan, and in countries like the UK and the US and Europe. We saw people, I mean, going out every day, calling on their governments to stop this massacre on Gaza, to to divest from companies that profit from the death and the destruction of the Palestinian people. And I think that this is something that needs to keep, that people need to keep doing, even if the attacks have stopped. We're still under blockade. We're still, I mean, these attacks are unexpected. They could be reoccurring any day. And I call upon all the people who stand with the Palestinians to boycott the Israelis on all levels, not only economic level, but cultural, political, to protest in order to stop the flow of money and arms to Israel. Every aggression that happens over Gaza, we see new weapons. Gaza is a testing field for the Israeli army. And like, for instance, this time it was really weird because sometimes we would not hear the attack, but we would feel the ground shaking and the buildings would like be moving underneath us. But we wouldn't hear, the striking of the missiles. So the types of weapons were really different this time, as they were in every aggression. Like in the 2008 aggression, they used dime, they used white phosphorus. It happens every time they attack us. So I call upon all the all people who stand in solidarity with us to keep these protests going, to boycott Israel, to call on the UN to impose sanctions on Israel, and to hold them accountable for all the war crimes they have been committing for over 70 years. Somehow every time they commit a crime, nobody holds them accountable. This has got to change. This is what, every person can play a role in boycotting Israel and holding it accountable. So this massacre on civilians, on innocent people stops. We have the right to defend people who are under occupation. We have the right to defend ourselves by international law. Our resistance is legitimate, and we will not back down until we gain freedom and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you. That's both an important reminder and a raw account of the experience of living under bombardment, but a reminder of the reality that on the day the bombs stopped dropping, Palestinians in Gaza, of course, still woke up with the ongoing brutality of the siege. I'm reminded of something I saw in a recent talk when someone said it doesn't make sense to talk about post-traumatic stress being experienced by people in Gaza because there is no post to the trauma continues. And part of our message tonight is an understanding of Israel's structure of apartheid being imposed upon all Palestinians. The siege in Gaza is one manifestation of the imposition of apartheid. We are going to turn now to our second speaker, Raya Asana. Raya is familiar to many of you in the UK. She was here for many years as a coordinator of the work of the Boycott National Committee in the UK and did outstanding work in taking forward and supporting the development of BDS campaigns in the UK. She's now a research coordinator at Who Profits, and she's an activist based in Haifa. Really pleased to welcome Raya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Ben, and shukran, Rana, for your intervention as well. Maybe just a disclaimer that I am a researcher for Who Profits, but I am not representing Who Profits here today. So I'll be talking a little bit about the processes that are developing in Palestine 48. When I say Palestine 48, I mean that area that the Israeli settler colony has declared sovereignty over. I'll be talking about the processes that I've witnessed, have been involved in, but I think they also represent and reflect what's happening in Palestine and across historic Palestine as a whole. And what's what's been powerful about what is actually taking place now in Palestine is so powerful to the level that I think it is the processes that are developing are ones that are in effect a game changer on the political landscape. So despite the kind of the pain and the violence of a lived reality of being a colonized people, the last month has been one of immense inspiration. It has been one of unity. It has been one of empowerment. It has been one where there is kind of a sense of agency, an agency from below that is developing in a very transformative way. So no matter kind of how we move on from this moment in time, what we have gone through and what Palestine has gone through over the last month is going to shape our future. And what we do over the kind of how we carry what took place over the last month. And with that, also the role of the international solidarity movement, I think, and we can talk about that at the end, is going to be transformative. It's going to be transformative for the future. So I think we have to like really be attentive to processes that are developing on the ground. And there's a number of elements of why I think what is happening has been so transformative. One is this current uprising at the moment is called the Unity Uprising. This is how we are referring to it in Palestine, because it is defying all the political objectives that the settler colony has set for itself since its establishment. It is Israeli settler colonialism works on the level of fragmenting Palestinians, not only in terms of geographic fragmentation. So besieging Gaza, implementing military occupation over people in the West Bank, annexing East Jerusalem, and kind of giving Palestinians within the borders of the settler colony an ID, and kind of giving a sense of that the struggle is one for citizenship and identity within the kind of the structures of the settler colony. But Israel settler colonialism, it has done so not on just a geography. The fragmentation is not just a question of land and geography, but fragmentation is primarily a one about politics, so political fragmentation. It's about identity fragmentation, and it's about the inability or closing up on the ability of Palestinians to see themselves as one unit. So for Palestinians in 48, it's a struggle within the laws, the Israeli courts, the Israeli Knesset. In the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority representation, and so it's colonialism, it's occupation, and so on. And I think what has happened in the last month has been a proof of the failure of the Israeli settler colonial project. One that we, maybe a month ago, we wouldn't have been so sure that it has been a failure. In the sense that the political paradigm has shifted so much over a month that it has transformed us as people that are living in this land, that are people that are struggling for freedom and liberation. And I think it has really shattered the settler colonies project and its kind of euphoric sense of victory of where it is going. And I think we've seen that locally, but we also have seen that on the international scale. Everybody, when I was in the UK or, whatever, we're always talking about how the deterioration of kind of the spaces or the lack of spaces that you can do Palestine politics in, how the state attack is increasing, how spaces for Palestine solidarity are shrinking and becoming depoliticized in that sense, that it's very primarily focused on international law and so on, and that Palestine has been stripped of its political organ, of its political heart, because Palestine is not a legal question, it's a political question first and foremost. And we've been pushed back to the wall, pushed to the wall to kind of undeclare it as a political and a moral question. And I think the movements both in Palestine and across the world of solidarity have kind of defied what a lot of us kind of were thinking and feeling maybe like just a month ago. So I think it's extremely empowering and extremely significant in that sense. But so the first element is the unity and the shattering of kind of the marking the failure of the project. And marking the failure of the project doesn't mean that we've been victorious over the project. We've just marked the failure of that project. And the second element of what I think makes this significantly different and will shape our future is, I think, the rejection of the political elite, the narratives that have been pushed and shoved down our throat by Palestinian political elite, be it in Palestine 48 or be it the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, that are pushing and working towards fragmentation and capitulation in one way or another to the settler colony in different forms. And this rejection of the political elite is not just one of sloganeering, but it's actually a rejection that is manifesting itself in the way that we are organizing on the ground. So it's not just, we reject this politics, we do not want, we see ourselves as different, we're part of the Palestinian people as a whole, but actually there are processes that are developing on the ground that are building on that rejection. So it's not just kind of the virtue of political sloganeering. And I kind of want to give you some examples of what this actually looks like on the ground in terms of organizing. So there have been autonomous and independent organizing collectives that have sprung out throughout Palestine 48 and in the West Bank, youth groups and so on that are organizing from the ground and from below. We saw mental health support collective being developed. We saw medical care groups that have been set up to give medical care and support for protesters and people that have been injured either by Israeli citizens who are roaming the streets looking for Palestinians to attack. They were roaming the streets with guns, with batons and so on, attacking us, attacking communities in the streets, attacking people in the street. And often when these attacks were taking place, the police wasn't there, or the police was actually backing the Israeli citizens who are, have declared themselves as the non-organized arm of the Israeli state. Which is kind of effectively what we've seen. We talk all the time about Israeli society being a militarized society, but you have an organized military wing, that is the Israeli police and the Israeli army, and you have a non-uniformed militarized arm of the state that is every single Israeli citizen, and that's what we saw transcend, and that's what we saw happen on the streets across historic Palestine. So medical care groups developed to deliver medical services and medical care to people, because the Israeli medical care institutions weren't delivering those services to people who were in need. And importantly, what Israel has kind of in Palestine 48 has started now adopting the strategy that it has been implementing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem for decades, a strategy of deterrence by violence and by mass arrests, and specifically mass arrest of minors and youth as a specific strategy to make people scared to come out on the streets, scared to resist. And it's a strategy of Israel of how you mass arrest the population to stop it from being able to resist in the future. And we see the same methods that people see implemented by the military in the West Bank or by one of its wings in East Jerusalem. We see them transferring and are being used against Palestinians who are, quote unquote, supposedly equal citizens of the settler colony, right? And so we have over 1,700 Palestinians from Palestine 48 have been arrested over the course of the last month. Lawyers have documented extreme cases of assault, physical, mental, some torture cases, beatings at police stations, and so on. But defendants were also defended by collectives of lawyers that were organizing in every town, in every village, in every city, Palestinian lawyers coming, defending protesters pro bono, giving them legal advice and legal support. These are not lawyers, these are not the kind of the big human rights institutions and organizations. This is not NGO-led work. This is grassroots activists coming together spontaneously and for the purpose of protecting and defending people who are on the streets. And the protection and defense isn't a defensive mechanism. Protection and defense is an offensive mechanism when you are in a situation, when you're a colonized population under settler colonialism. So us coming together in this kind of way, in these ways of organizing, has been transformative for everybody who's involved in organizing, but it's politically also transformative because it shows you what can be done. It shows you that, you know, transforming our reality is not one that is dependent on kind of either established political parties or established NGOs and so on, and it shows the way forward. And we saw this level of organizing, and maybe I know that my time has run out, but that this way of organizing, this kind of collectivity of grassroots, of unity, and at the same time rejection of the status quo that is presented either by the Palestinian leadership, be it what may, or by the Israeli state, is one that shaped the strike itself, and it's one that actually made the strike possible. The strike was not a top-down strike. The strike developed from below. It was a popular demand strike. It was not a trade union-led strike. It was a strike, it was a political strike that had economic implications, and maybe in the Q&A, we can kind of elaborate a little bit more on the strike itself, because I think it's quite significant and it's probably quite different from what people think about when they think general strike, you know, kind of in the UK or in other localities. And maybe should I say now what I think people should do? Should I wait for another?
We'll come back to that, but if you want to say something briefly now, Ryan, then we will. I want to create some space at the end for all of you also to tell us what you think our priorities should be.
Yeah, I think a number of important things. I think the first thing that people should do is be attentive to what is actually happening on the ground. And being attentive is not just reading statements that have been written by people on the ground. It's also recognizing that a political shift is taking place, that new formations are being developed, new structures of resistance are being developed. So we need to kind of move away from institution to institution. We need to move to a process of people to people. So trade union is to trade, worker to worker solidarity, not trade union to trade union, because actually what is happening now is that we're debunking those structures. Those structures have not served us, and new structures are being developed and built on the ground. So we have to kind of think about how we do solidarity with people, not with institutions and structures. That's one. I think two, the people in the UK have a responsibility to understand settler colonialism and to speak of Zionism as an oppressive ideology, as a settler colonial ideology, and to recognize the role of British imperialism in the predicament that we find ourselves in today. And third, I think it's important for people to recognize that the different developments taking place on the ground, and all of the campaigns are calling for the intensification of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. There is a Palestinian Economic Week that has been called for next week, and we can, again, there's no time to talk about that. Maybe we can do something separate about that. But people have asked for the international community to solidify and strengthen its boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Palestinian trade unionists at the time of the general strike issued, again, a statement demanding of the international community to intensify its boycott and divestment and sanctions movement. So that's a clear voice that is coming from the ground, from below. And the last thing, I think we have to think of Palestine as not a question of geography, and not a question of human rights in its narrow sense. Palestine is a political question, and Palestine, because it's a political question, we have to de-isolate Palestine, and we have to talk about Palestine as an anti-colonial struggle, as an anti-racist struggle at the same time. And so I think we have to think about how do we integrate and relate Palestine to struggles wherever we are, because it's not about semantics, because actually being in solidarity with Palestine and struggling for Palestinian liberation is not just a question of our future, but it's a question that is transformative for everybody that is involved in that struggle. So I think you have to kind of also personally center yourself in it. You're not doing it for us, you're doing it for yourselves. So that's it.
Raya, thank you so much. There is so much there, and I hope we have space to pick up in the Q&A, particularly some of the issues Raya has raised about how we understand the dynamics of the general strike, but also what she said about the shape of this growing resistance and the grassroots nature of that resistance. And that is a perfect link, I think, for me to introduce our final speaker. Those of you who are at PSC's AGM would have heard her speaking before. She is a mobilization coordinator at an important grassroots organization, Grassroots Jerusalem, that is devoted to reveal the neglected Palestinian perspective on Jerusalem. She's been actively involved in shaping the resistance in Sheikh Jarrah and elsewhere in Jerusalem. Please welcome Amani Khalifa.
Ben, and thank you all for having me again. It's a great pleasure to be with Raya and Rana. So maybe just building up on what Raya has been saying and looking, I'll be taking us back to Jerusalem and zooming into Jerusalem in order to understand what has been the situation since the ceasefire and how Palestinians have been reacting in relation to all of the work that is being organized on the ground. But let me start by saying, let's change the rhetoric as well and the discourse about Jerusalem. I mean, we keep saying East Jerusalem, and understanding that the situation is a settler colonial one and not a human rights one. It is the basic understanding that Jerusalem has been occupied during 1948. The west part of Jerusalem has been occupied since 1948, and the eastern part of Jerusalem has been occupied since 1967. So even in Arabic, we don't use this terminology. For us, it's Al-Quds al-Muhtalli, occupied Jerusalem, that's it. So maybe let's just train ourselves and start with this as a way of shifting the discourse, because this is what Palestinians have been saying, raising the bar and challenging all of the discourse that has been imposed around us. But going back to again and zooming in into the city that sparked it all, right? This is, I mean, everyone is saying it all started from Jerusalem, and this is the core of all what we're witnessing. So obviously the ceasefire, since the ceasefire announcement, the violence and the occupation hasn't stopped. But our reaction to it, and this is what Raya has been saying, has been different, that we are believing now that we can do something different about it locally and internationally. But let me again take you into specific examples about how this violence has been manifested in the city. Raya spoke about the massive arrest campaign. In Jerusalem only, 550 people were arrested, 20% of which are minors, and 20 detainees were sent to administrative detention, meaning that they have no charges. The lawyer can't access their files. It's all security. It's all under security reasoning of threats. And so people and it keeps renewing detention without the lawyers or the family knowing what the charges are. For us, this massive campaign of arrests and aggression should be seen only as a policy of collective punishment. This is what the State of Israel is aiming to do, as telling us, okay, you have been participating in all of these protests. It's time now to punish you for this. Not only that, but in my opinion, it's important to understand this as a tool of dismantling any structures of organizing, mobilization, and networking amongst the local community, because it's really important, and I've been speaking with lawyers and I've been seeing this myself. It is exhausted for the community as a whole to keep up with this massive number of arrests. It is the bureaucracy of the arrests that keeps us busy. We want to keep up with the numbers. We need to make sure that every family has money to pay for the bails, that we have lawyers representing all of these families. And we've been seeing escalation in the dates of arrests and the extension of the arrests. So this bureaucracy, so-called bureaucracy, it aims to break our unity and keep us busy and not being able to think about the organizing, what we want to do next day. This is what the occupation has been about for years in Palestine. Pretty much is divide and conquer, and every community is preoccupied with the direct policies that are shaping its daily and living experiences, and we're not being able to unite and reconnect beyond our conditions of living. So it's really important to look at these policies only as a collective punishment policies in Jerusalem and everywhere in 1948. But again, I mean, even in 1948, because in 1948, people are not used to this massive number of arrests. It's different than Jerusalem and the West Bank. And now we're seeing the reaction. Everyone is creating, and I'll take us a bit outside of Jerusalem and bring those examples from 48. People are, I just saw news from Tamra, which is a village in the Galilee, the north part of Palestine. They just opened a local fund for people who were arrested. So all of these institutions and committees and organizing in 48 are highly important because they are being independent of the state apparatus of the colonial state of Israel. And this is what we have been calling for years. I mean, don't go to the Israeli parliament, don't go to the Knesset, keep the organizing locally amongst our communities and making it united and connected to other people, to other places in Palestine, such as Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank, and the diaspora for sure. I'll take us again, sorry, back to Jerusalem. And it's really important to look at the situation in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, but in Jerusalem as a whole. In these both communities, the protests have not been stopped. People have been protesting. In Sheikh Jarrah specifically, I don't know if you've been following the news, on the 17th of May, they have been imposition of a military blockade in the neighborhood in Karm al-Jaouni, and journalists and people who were going to the neighborhood in order to show support are prohibited from entering the neighborhood. But despite this military blockade, people have been managing somehow to overcome this obstacle and to enter the neighborhood. So this is the sort of power that we are speaking about. In Silwan as well, people have set up a protest tent, and there are almost every night activities in this tent, despite different activities, sometimes singing or graffiti, or just holding conversation in the evening, understanding the situation in Silwan. Despite, and this is happening despite the fact that this tent almost every night is being raided by the Israeli army, and youth are being arrested every night almost from Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah. I'll go, I just want to add. So speaking, I mean, you've been hearing all of these slogans about save Sheikh Jarrah and save Silwan, and Palestinians just started another campaign. It's called Save Lifta, another village in the west part of occupied Jerusalem. And we will be reaching out, calling you on more and more campaigns all the time, because this is a colonial project, is continuous. So what we're saying, it doesn't matter if this is, if you remember only the cases of 4 families in Sheikh Jarrah or 85 families in Silwan. What you really need to remember that all of these policies aim at expulsion of Palestinians from Jerusalem and elsewhere in Palestine. So we need you to act, and not when there is an attack, an assault on Gaza. We need you to act, especially on these moments where someone might think that the situation is quiet, but the violence is systematic. It doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear. So it's really important to remember this, and remember that we want to build on this moment, that we need you to adapt to what we are saying, what Raya has been saying about the settler colonial frame of analysis. And I know sometimes people find it much easier to use the apartheid, because there are, I don't want to go in this, there are long list of reasons why, but use our terminology as well. I mean, we have it, and people are using apartheid and settler colonialism, but we need you to organize more. We don't need symbolic solidarity. We need political actions. I remember, I mean, speaking with families in Sheikh Jarrah, their main message was, we don't need money, we don't need charity, we don't need empathy, we need people to take on political actions. And for us now is applying sanctions, because I mean, BDS and boycotting, it was the basic level. And we have been saying all the time, BDS is a way of organizing. So push it further, push your governments to apply pressure on the state of Israel. This is the final message I want to finish this intervention with.
Amani, thank you. Listen, we've got a huge amount to grapple with, and we've got about half an hour or so, I think, to try to get through as many questions. I'm going to try to group them. And there are a number of questions that are picking up on the themes of what you've said about this transformative moment on the ground and how we understand it. There are questions that are addressing what is happening in terms of the Israeli government and any significance in relation to that. And a number of people have asked questions about that. And then there's a body of questions that really pick up and focus on what you've all said about what is required from the solidarity movement, and some wanting to get a sense of, in a sense, the reaction on the ground in Palestine to the displays of solidarity, what that means, and how you would like us to build on them. So I'm going to try to go through all those. Can I pick up first of all, and it's sort of picking up on, Raya, something you said, so I may come to you first of all and then expand it. You said something about that what has happened in the past few weeks, this unified resistance, has shown the failure of the settler colonial project to fragment and dislocate the Palestinian people. But you also said it wasn't perhaps clear until this moment of the extent to which that had failed. Can you say something about your sense of what has created the conditions for this transformative moment? Why has this happened now? And linked to that, your sense of how does it need to be sustained? And I'm asking that in particular in relation to the repressive reaction, the waves of arrest that both you and Amani have talked about. How can this unified grassroots resistance be sustained in the face of what will be excessive and repressive responses from the Israeli state? So why now? What created the conditions, and how can it be sustained? Really simple, easy questions for you.
I think if we had a very clear answer to that, we would be, you know, on the winners. I think there's a number. I think there's quite a lot of factors, but we still need time to think. Like, you know, I'm gonna kind of maybe give a number of factors, but it's by no means a complete answer. I think if, like, in Palestine 48, I think you have to, let me start it differently. There's a tendency, I think, to flatten out colonized communities. There's a tendency to think of the Palestinian people as a bulk body, as only facing one form of repression and exploitation. But I think we have to think and understand also that there's very significant and real class dynamics that are at play at the moment and have always been in Palestine, but is very much amplified throughout this current uprising. The people that were on the streets in Palestine 48 were out on the streets because of what was going on in Jerusalem, obviously, because Jerusalem is not just a religious heart, it is also a cultural and a political heart for the Palestinians, and maybe for others around the world. The inspiration from the resistance that was put by primarily youth in Jerusalem also was extremely inspiring. I think, you know, in Jerusalem, it wasn't the elite of Jerusalem at the forefront of the struggle in Al-Aqsa Mosque or on the streets. It was normal, working class, and impoverished kids. 70% of people in Jerusalem live under the poverty line. Unemployment level are extremely high. You know, so those are kind of, you have to, people started calling them the TikTok generation at the beginning, because that's what it was, you know, like it was those kids taking photos of themselves, filming themselves, and people being extremely inspired by acts of resistance, of what it means to stand up for yourself. And for so long, people have not felt like they were standing up for themselves. People have been battered, impoverished, kind of isolated, and so on. And so you saw that in the sense of what took place in Jerusalem, but how people in other places were inspired. It wasn't just the politics of Jerusalem as Jerusalem, or what it meant to be expelling people from their homes, like in Sheikh Jarrah. It just tells you how deep the idea and the feeling of expulsion is for every Palestinian. You know, in Jaffa, there's thousands of people that are being threatened with expulsion from their homes. In Ben Naqab, there's over 100,000 Palestinians who will be expelled, you know, that are meant to be expelled from their homes, and their homes completely demolished. So Jerusalem, kind of what took place in Jerusalem, both on the kind of the centrality of it politically, what it meant in terms of expulsion for Palestinian, and the fact that that's a lived reality for every Palestinian under settler colonialism, but also the class dynamics of who was leading the struggle in Jerusalem also impacted who was participating in it and who was inspired by the resistance that was put forward in Jerusalem. in what was engulfing Palestine 48. And you see that very clearly with the arrest. The mass majority of people arrested are youth, so young people, minors, a lot of minors that are being arrested, and the mass majority are people from working class, neighborhood, socioeconomic, like hard social and economic backgrounds. And so that is kind of the complexity of what is going on, but also I think the transformative power of what is actually going on. And at the same time, you have that is taking place. You have social networks that are that I talked about, but also Amani spoke about. And I think the way that we're able to keep that going is by empowering those social networks and thinking about how care is also a political act, and how you empowering a community to continue resisting means also empowering it to protect itself at this moment. So for example, there is a fund that is being built for legal detainees. So the cost of legal representation for Palestinians from 48 who are over 200 people will be indicted. The legal cost is expensive, and considering that a lot of these people come from communities that are already impoverished, Palestinian society as a whole, there's majority kind of a working class and impoverished community, regardless of where you live. So a fund is being put forward and developed, and that's another way that people internationally and globally can support. Soon there will be a link, a website where you can donate, where you can support. And I think that's an important way of supporting. And I think the way that we keep it going is by constantly having this dynamic, right? Of kind of how do you build, continue resisting, but how do you enable people to continue resist at the same time? And those are two things that we have to keep playing with. But it's also, we should also recognize that, you know, this is a very significant moment. It's a very powerful moment and a very transformative moment, but we're not delusional to think that the struggle for freedom or our struggle against settler colonialism is one that is, you know, is going to end in the next month or two. This is what we're going through now as a building step towards that. And it's important, the importance of it is how do we build the networks that enable us to be in a better place as we keep going.
Thank you, Raya. Amani, Rana, is there anything you want to add? And particularly, I think, on the aspect of how you see the momentum from these protests being sustained.
I mean, Rana, you wanted to add something? I can go after.
No, I'm fine. I think she's covered everything.
Okay.
Unless you can go ahead, Aman.
I mean, two main things. The PA, the leadership, the conservative leadership is irrelevant anymore in 48. And actually, I mean, understanding the context of Jerusalem, understanding that there is no conservative leadership in Jerusalem. People were left to face their reality by themselves. And this what led to this encounter with the occupation forces for people again and again to keep fighting this, because there is no leadership similar to the situation that we have in 48 and to the situation that we have in the West Bank with the Palestinian Authority. And actually, it's really important to mention that arrests were taken place by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank as well. 20 youth were arrested because they participated in different protests. So it's another form of colonialism that is taking place. So it's really important to look at all of the actions that are overcoming this obstacle. And the fact what will keep it, in my own opinion, sustainable, the fact that we realize our capacities, we realize the moment that we can. this is, I mean, it's not a nostalgic moment or a romantic moment, and I have no problem with any romance here when it comes to political actions. But I think that we felt it. The fact that we felt it, we sensed it, we experienced it. When I see people, youth coming from Nazareth and Haifa, and they are organizing a marathon this weekend, tomorrow, in Sheikh Jarrah. There are massive groups coming from Haifa and coming from Nazareth to show support in Jerusalem. So we are not resting. It is continuous already. These connections that we are making, we just need to think about more and more actions that are independent of any institutions, independent of any conservative leadership, the Israeli one and the Palestinian one, because both are aligned in my own opinion, and they are aiming at preventing our mobility and networking. So maybe this, and I don't know, maybe it's gonna be over, honestly, but we need to remember this. It might be over, this organizing, this moment might be over tomorrow. But this, as Raya mentioned, this transformative, its implication will continue with us until the next phase, until the next round of facing the Israeli colonial regime.
Okay, thank you, Amani. We've got a couple of quick practical questions that have come in after the last two contributions, which are about how people can directly support these grassroots mobilizations. Raya, you talked about the launch of a fund. Is there any more information you can give at the moment? If not, it's something we can follow up with. But is there anywhere you can immediately point people to in terms of how they can contribute and support that?
As you can imagine, it's been pretty hectic organizing on the ground and trying to organize these platforms and so on. But it is in the making, and soon we can send you guys the link once it's live, and you can send it to your supporters and broadcast it on your networks, which would be great. We will need your support. We will need every one of you to contribute in any way that they can. So please do so. Please go back to your trade unions. Try to get them to also send money. There are big structures. We know that they have money. So get them moving, get your neighborhood moving, do a fundraiser, talk about Palestinian political prisoners, not just those in 48. Talk about all Palestinian political prisoners. There's thousands of them incarcerated in Israeli jails. Thousands of them go in and out on a regular basis. So use the fundraiser as a political organizing tool as well, where you are, not just send money.
Okay, I won't comment about the ease of getting money from trade unions, but I take the point. Okay, we've got a couple of questions which I think I'm going to know the answer to, but two or three people have asked them, so I'll pick them up. They're focused on what's happening at the moment in relation to the Israeli government. Whether you think that is likely to change anything, I suspect I know the answer to that. But there is another angle that somebody's asked, which is how do we understand the participation of RAM in this coalition that's been established, and anything that you want to say about that. I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
Amani?
I'll start, and if you want to add. Okay, I mean, truly quickly about the Israeli government and the new government with the right wing or the far right wing. This is the new term now we are being introduced to. It doesn't matter, truly. Even previous, and it's not something that a Palestinian in this webinar is saying. Go back to the history, look at previous Israeli governments. None of them has done anything to Palestinians but massacre them, incarcerate them, attack them. So it's a continuous, this is the relationship between us and this government. We have no expectations whatsoever from any government to give any freedom or justice for Palestinians. And this is, I mean, and when we say it's a settler colony, this is the basic understanding. We have no expectations because we understand that this settler colony aims again and again at our expulsion. They don't want to see us, they want to replace us with Israeli settlers and to have our homes and to have our land. So it doesn't matter if Bibi is gone, I'm not gonna celebrate this moment. There is nothing for celebration here. Or if Naftali Bennett is coming with Yair Lapid, it doesn't matter. They will keep on doing what they have been doing for years. Quickly about Ra'am, and I think Mansour Abbas political party, I think it's really important to read this as a historical development and not one event that we are witnessing. In my own opinion, this is what Palestinian political parties participating in the Israeli parliament have caused, because it didn't happen in one day. I remember when we all the time were calling for boycotting the Israeli parliament, and I will never vote for any Israeli parliament. People were saying, but we need this political representation. There is no alternative on the ground. Now, in this moment, we are seeing that this alternative is not gonna be by itself. I mean, we need to build it, right? We need to unite around it and not give the state of Israel an excuse that it is a democratic state by having Palestinians being represented in its parliament. So it's an accumulation. This is the moment that we are witnessing because other political Palestinian parties have been saying we need to do this. We have no alternative. It's a must. Then why is it now different all of a sudden if Mansour Abbas is being part, because he's fully participating in this government. This is actually what he is doing, and he actually caused this سقوط Netanyahu, yes, for Bibi Netanyahu to be gone. He contributed to this, but this is the rhetoric that they have been feeding the Palestinian community in 48 with. So to me, it is furious, and I'm angry about it. Don't misunderstand me, but it's really important to see it in a context. It's a built up, and it's not one moment that happened in 2021.
Rana Rai, I don't know if you want to add anything. I think that was a fairly comprehensive answer. Okay, I want to turn in this final section then just to focus on the role of the solidarity movement. I've got a question first of all, which I want to start with Rana, I think, which is what's the level of awareness of Palestinians of the protests that have been happening? The question focuses in particular on the protests that have been happening here in the UK. So to what extent are they visible? The numbers of people who've been marching, and can you say something about what that means as a Palestinian? First of all, Rana, with you in Gaza, seeing people mobilizing on the streets of London and elsewhere.
Yes, you know, the Palestinian society and mainly the Gazan society is very politicized. I mean, even the youth here, they follow the news. We're glued to our phones all the time, just watching news and listening to news. And young activists and other people, I mean, ordinary people have been following up a lot on the protests that have been going on. And we're really, it's really heartwarming to see that this is the first time such massive numbers of people have took to the streets and protested. I mean, in the US, we didn't imagine this would happen in the US, and it's still going on today. Last Saturday, 35,000 people in Washington, DC. So we're closely watching everything that's going on outside. Young people here, influencers, mainly on Instagram, they've been doing lives ever since the Sheikh Jarrah events have been taking place early Ramadan. and they've been doing this like for every day in Ramadan for like 7 straight hours, where they would be airing everything that's happening in Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah. And when the aggression took place in Gaza, they were airing that as well. It was mainly steered by young people, and this was this really gave us hope, because like, I don't know which one of the speakers said that this generation was accused of being the TikTok generation, but they have used all these social platforms to reach out to the world. And this has had a tremendous effect, I think, where we have seen the change coming from the youth. I mean, we didn't really believe that this would happen, but I mean, they have really played a significant role in changing public opinion around the world using social media. So we're keeping a close eye on what's happening every day.
Amani and Raya, do you want to add anything in terms of your sense of the visibility of these protests and what they mean? Okay, so listening to the sorry, go on, Raya.
Maybe just, I think that it's important, at least that's how I see it, that the solidarity movement, or the growth of it, or what we've seen over the past few weeks, is not just a virtue of just Palestine alone. I think it's also a result of an accumulation of the struggles that have been going on in those areas. If we think about the BLM movement, anti-racist struggles, again, kind of the questioning of government and political power more generally, and how people see that. I think it shows us, it amplifies even further what it means to struggle in solidarity, and how struggles flow into one another. So I think really what we see is kind of both a rejection of the intimidation of what has been going on around Palestine, but it's also a much more formative sense and a realization and an acceptance of Palestine as also a struggle against settler colonialism, as one as against racism, and that the government solidarity between the US government and the Israeli government and the British government and the Israeli government and so on is one that people are rejecting because also they have their own grievances against their governments. And so I think it's a wonderful moment of solidarity. I think it was wonderful that at the demonstration in London, it wasn't just Palestine, it was Colombia and Palestine. I think this is where we need to go. That's the direction that we need to continue marching in, linking struggles together, understanding struggles at their roots, not just at kind of the events that appear once in a while, and grasping to the roots of struggle, grasping to the roots of oppression, enables us to build those links. And I think we're kind of moving hopefully in a direction where those links are made in a much more generous way and in a much more stronger way. And we see that empowers solidarity.
Okay, well, that leads us neatly to, so what I want to do to conclude is just to give you all a minute or so, really just for your concluding remarks, but if in particular you could say anything in conclusion that you want to give, because I'm making the presumption that everybody in this audience is a solidarity activist wherever you are based, many from the UK, but I know we are joined by international colleagues as well. But what message do you want to give to people about what you require from us as solidarity activists in conclusion? And I don't know who wants to go first. I'll leave it to you to decide.
I just want to say that as for people living outside in the West or any other part of the world, I urge you to listen to the Palestinian narrative. I know that mainstream media outside blocks our voices. So for me, I'm willing to write, I've published and written in some online publications, one in the UK, I believe. So if you have access or any network with any online publications and you would like to hear from us, I'm a writer, and I also have fellow writers here. We are in numbers and other groups here. So listen to what we have to say. Don't get your news from people who, from sources who are not credible. Listen to what we have to say. Because a person living here, we're here in Gaza, where we're living and witnessing everything firsthand, and it's not like people who will tell you from outside of Gaza. And I think, yeah, we still have, for me, I still have a lot to say about the 11-day aggression that happened the past 2 weeks.
Thank you, Rana. And can I say we will provide a link in a follow-up to this to the We Are Not Numbers website. We'll post it now in the chat, but we'll provide a follow-up link to the website. I don't know who wants to go first now, Amani or Ryan.
It's, we've really mentioned several things in terms of solidarity, but I want to remind us all that, yes, there is a price for solidarity. It's expensive and we need to pay a price, and we shouldn't be afraid of this price. Because just think about it. If Palestinians are paying this, it's their living experience under these colonial conditions. Sometimes, yes, it might cost you your job. You'll have a different one, but don't be threatened by these costs, and keep organizing. For me, you have a lot to do in Britain, in the UK and elsewhere. Just learn how the networks between the State of Israel and your own country, and work from there. You don't need Palestinians to tell you all the time what to do. You know it yourself from your living, from your own conditions. So yes, keep it up. Thank you.
Raya, final word to you.
Thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you PSC for organizing this. First, support the fundraiser. When it comes out, you'll see it. I'm sure the PSC will support it. So be generous, be in solidarity. I'm not often an advocate of charitable work, but this is not charitable work. This is political solidarity that demands financial assistance. So that's one. Two, I think intensify your campaigns. Divestment needs to be center stage in kind of the work that people are doing, because divestment is, again, not about Palestine. It's about a transformative act that you do for your institution and for whatever you find yourself. And finally, I think resist every form of oppression that you see around you. It is, being in solidarity, and being in solidarity with Palestine is not just worrying about Palestinians. It is primarily thinking through of what are the structures of oppression that maintain oppression of Palestinians and oppression of people everywhere. So it's resistance to all forms of oppression. And, try to change your government. That would help a lot, I think. Thank you.
Okay, listen, thank you all. And can I just say, first of all, I know I speak on behalf of everybody here when I thank you, not just for your inspiring contributions this evening, but for your example, for the samud and the inspiration of your unified resistance. And if we weren't all sat in our homes in front of our computer screens, trust me, you'd be getting a standing ovation. So we salute you. And let me end by saying this, because the demonstrations of solidarity that we saw were extraordinary. We're inspired tonight by witnessing a new generation of activists on the ground in Palestine. What was remarkable about the demonstrations of solidarity in the UK were the numbers of young people joining them, and mirrored by displays of activism in school playgrounds across the UK, people protesting on behalf of Palestine. Solidarity begins as an act of empathy, I always say. It begins of a recognition of common humanity, and a recognition that an injustice to anyone, anywhere, is an injustice to everyone, everywhere. but solidarity calls on us to do more than show empathy, to do more than be motivated to come out on the streets because of justified outrage at injustice. It calls upon us to act. And we know that it calls upon us primarily to act, to end the complicity of our government, of our public bodies, of our corporations. So let me call you all to action. We do want you back out on the streets on June the 12th, where we'll be mobilizing at Downing Street as part of the Resist G7 protests. The Saturday that we are mobilizing, June the 12th, is as part of the G7 protests, the call for international justice. So join us outside Downing Street, and let's change our government that day. Yeah. Then we are going to be mobilizing a Palestine bloc within the People's Assembly March on June the 26th. We expect that to be a huge march addressing a whole range of issues, unifying struggles, and we want a large Palestine bloc on that march. So join us on the 26th. And then we've called for 3 days of action in July. There's a lobby of Parliament on July the 8th. On July the 9th, which most of you will know is the 16th anniversary of the BDS call, there's a student day of action across the UK supporting divestment campaigns. And the centerpiece of that is going to be a student march from university to university in London. And on the 10th, the Saturday, we're calling for a day of action centered on the ongoing Puma campaign, with action outside sports stores and Puma shops across the UK. So join us for all of those events. If you're not a member of PSC, join us, contribute to the funds that we've been asked to contribute to, and we will make sure we amplify that once that's set up. I want to thank you all for attending. Thank you to our speakers. Solidarity, the struggle continues.